The last week was spent with crews tearing down walls, breaking floors, and digging through yards, all in search of Pablo Escobar's long-rumored hidden treasures. For decades, stories had circulated about secret vaults buried beneath his luxurious estates, places built not just to hide money but to protect weapons, records, and secrets of his empire. These vaults were spoken about in whispers, surrounded by mystery and fear. For years, they remained hidden from the world, but now something remarkable has been uncovered. One of these vaults was finally opened, and inside, investigators found weapons, financial ledgers, and signs of an empire that had been carefully guarded in the shadows. But the big question remains, what else is still buried in the ground, waiting to be discovered in this dark labyrinth of wealth and paranoia? The story of Escobar's hidden vaults is tied closely to the story of his rise from a petty criminal to one of the most powerful and feared drug lords in history. Pablo Escobar's empire did not begin with massive riches or political power. It began with small-time crimes on the streets of Medellin. As a teenager, he learned quickly that desperation could be turned into opportunity if one was ruthless enough. He began by stealing tombstones from graveyards, scraping off the names with sandblasters, and reselling them to unsuspecting families. From there, he moved into car theft, extortion, and gang violence. Each step became bolder and more violent. By the early 1970s, he had moved into kidnappings for ransom, and his group became known for killing their victims even after payments were made. In 1971, the abduction and murder of businessman Diego Echevarria marked a turning point. Escobar's crew walked away with $50,000, but more importantly, they left behind a reputation for ruthlessness that spread quickly across Colombia. It was this hunger for power that collided with a new and incredibly profitable opportunity: cocaine. By the mid-1970s, smuggling routes were beginning to open, and Escobar recognized the massive potential of the trade. In 1976, he was caught transporting 39 kilograms of cocaine hidden inside a car tire. The arrest might have destroyed another man, but for Escobar, it only reinforced his guiding philosophy, that money could buy freedom and violence could remove anyone who stood in his way. He bribed his way out of prison, and not long after, the officer who had arrested him was murdered. From that point on, Escobar's rule could be summed up by a single phrase: plata o plomo, meaning silver or lead. Take the bribe, or take a bullet. This approach allowed him to buy influence as well as safety. Escobar poured money into Colombian politics, bribing both conservative and liberal officials to ensure he had allies in every corner of government. In April 1978, he attended a meeting on a rural farm with other traffickers, a gathering that would mark the official birth of the Medellin cartel. Together, they built an operation so powerful that within months they were shipping nearly 19,000 kilograms of cocaine into the United States. Demand was skyrocketing, and Escobar had the foresight and ambition to dominate the trade on a scale no one had ever attempted before. His empire expanded quickly, and with the help of his partner Carlos Leder, Escobar transformed Norman's Cay, a small island in the Bahamas, into a fortress of smuggling operations. The island had its own private airstrip, a dock for receiving shipments, and refrigerated warehouses to store cocaine before it was sent to the American market. The profits from this single route were beyond anything Escobar had ever imagined. Money poured in so quickly it was impossible to count it all, and Escobar began to reshape his life to match his newfound power. In Antioquia, he built Hacienda Napoles, a sprawling 7,000-acre estate that symbolized both wealth and menace. The property included a grand colonial mansion, man-made lakes, an airstrip, a bullfighting ring, and a zoo stocked with exotic animals like giraffes, elephants, and hippos. He even decorated the grounds with massive life-size dinosaur statues. It was more than a home, it was a monument to his dominance, a place designed to remind the world of his power and wealth. But Escobar was not only feared. He carefully built a second identity, especially among the poor communities of Medellin. To them, he was a benefactor, a man who built housing projects, schools, hospitals, parks, and football fields. His generosity won him admiration and loyalty. For many, he became known as the Paisa Robin Hood, a criminal who stole from the rich world and gave back to the poor. This carefully crafted image was so powerful that it carried him into politics. In 1982, Escobar entered Colombia's Congress as an alternate member of the Liberal Party, a position that gave him diplomatic immunity and a passport that allowed him to travel without fear of arrest. Behind the scenes, however, his empire grew darker and more violent. His wealth bought politicians, police officers, and judges, but for those who could not be bought, Escobar offered the alternative of death. Rival gangs, government officials, and journalists all became targets of his campaign of terror. He understood that fear was as valuable a weapon as money, and he used both with ruthless efficiency. By the mid-1980s, his cartel controlled the majority of the world's cocaine trade, funneling billions of dollars into Colombia. The vaults discovered beneath his estates were built during this time, not just as safes for his wealth but as fortresses against betrayal. Inside them were not only weapons and money but also ledgers that revealed the extent of his empire, a paper trail of corruption, bribes, and secret dealings. Each vault was designed to guard not just riches but power itself. It is no wonder that even after his death, the search for these vaults has continued. Many believe countless caches remain hidden, buried deep beneath the soil of his sprawling properties. Escobar's story is one of contradictions, a man who was both feared and admired, who could order brutal killings one day and fund housing for the poor the next. He rose from stealing tombstones to building an empire that shaped global crime and altered the history of Colombia forever. His life was a mix of extreme wealth, terror, generosity, and paranoia. And while his reign ended in blood, the shadows of his empire still linger. The discovery of his hidden vaults is a reminder that Escobar's power was built not just on cocaine but on fear, secrecy, and the illusion of control. What investigators found inside is only a glimpse of the empire he created, and what still lies buried may continue to reveal new truths about the man who called himself both protector and predator of Medellin. Publicly, Pablo Escobar pretended that his wealth came from a small bicycle rental business he ran as a teenager. Privately, however, he was already one of the richest men in the world, with billions secured through cocaine trafficking. His rise into politics exposed him to more scrutiny than he was prepared for. Colombia's Justice Minister, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, began investigating him and openly called him what he truly was, a drug trafficker. Soon after, Luis Carlos Galán, the leader of the Liberal Party, expelled Escobar, stripping him of the political protection he had worked so hard to buy. By January 1984, Escobar stepped away from politics, but he did not forgive those who had humiliated him. Just 3 months later, Bonilla was assassinated. The killing silenced one of Escobar's strongest critics but also confirmed the image of a man who would murder anyone who stood in his way. From that point forward, Escobar's war shifted toward the Colombian justice system. Judges were bribed with fortunes, threatened into silence, or murdered in broad daylight. His biggest fear was extradition to the United States, where he knew his money and influence would mean nothing. Escobar made it clear, he would only consider surrender if extradition was banned. When his demands were denied, he responded with violence, funding a group called Los Extraditables. Their mission was simple: fight extradition with bombs, assassinations, and terror. In November 1985, guerrillas stormed the Palace of Justice in Bogotá. By the end of the siege, more than half of Colombia's Supreme Court justices were dead. Escobar's direct involvement was never proven, but suspicion surrounded him. Many believed the attack benefited him more than anyone else, and the stain of that massacre would forever linger on his legacy. The result was temporary. Colombia's top court declared the extradition treaty invalid. But Escobar's victory was short-lived, as the next president reinstated the treaty with U.S. support. Furious, Escobar struck back at politics itself. On August 18, 1989, Luis Carlos Galán, the same politician who had once expelled Escobar, was assassinated on his orders. Just weeks later, Escobar escalated his war even further by bombing Avianca Flight 203 in an attempt to kill Galán's successor, Cesar Gaviria. Gaviria missed the flight, but 107 innocent people, including 2 Americans, lost their lives. This single act changed everything. The death of U.S. citizens brought Washington directly into the fight, transforming Escobar's battle from a Colombian struggle into an international war. By the late 1980s, Escobar's Medellin cartel had reached an unimaginable level of power. It supplied an estimated 80% of the world's cocaine. More than 15 tons entered the United States every single day, carried by fleets of airplanes, ships, trucks, and even custom-built submarines. Escobar had become the undisputed king of cocaine, and with his crown came wealth on a scale few in history had ever seen. At the peak of his empire, the cartel was earning around $420 million every week. Escobar's personal fortune was believed to be between $30 and $60 billion, equivalent to more than $80 billion today. In 1987, Forbes magazine officially recognized him as one of the richest men alive, estimating his net worth at $3 billion. He stayed on Forbes' billionaire list for 7 straight years. His fortune revealed itself everywhere. Hacienda Napoles remained the crown jewel, a surreal blend of luxury mansion, private zoo, airstrip, and theme park. But it was far from his only property. In Medellin, he built the Monaco building, an 8-story fortress for his family, complete with swimming pools, tennis courts, garages, and a panic room for emergencies. In Guatape, he built La Manuela, a lakeside mansion named after his daughter, designed for wild parties and retreats. In the Caribbean, he claimed a corner of Isla Grande, where he built a fortified mansion with helicopter pads, bulletproof windows, and a pool, a hideaway fit for a king. Escobar also indulged in one of his greatest obsessions, collecting rare and eccentric cars. His garages held some of the world's most exotic vehicles. He owned a Porsche 911 Carrera 3.0 RSR once driven by Formula One champion Emerson Fittipaldi, a Cadillac V8 sedan modeled after Al Capone's, and one of the cartel's earliest transport cars, a blue Wartburg 311. His fleet also included Toyota Land Cruisers, known as Narco Toyotas for their heavy use in cartel operations, along with rare Porsche 356s, a Harley-Davidson motorcycle once owned by Frank Sinatra, and even the jet ski used in the James Bond movie The Spy Who Loved Me. Yet many of these cars were later destroyed in bombings during the cartel wars or seized by authorities. The burned remains of some still sit at Hacienda Napoles today, eerie reminders of his extravagant but violent life. His fortune was so vast that at one point he made an offer to the Colombian government. He would pay off the nation's entire $10 billion debt in exchange for protection from extradition. It was a proposal that highlighted both the staggering size of his wealth and the desperation of a man who knew his empire was under threat. The sheer volume of money pouring in created problems that bordered on the absurd. It arrived faster than it could be laundered, invested, or stored in banks. Instead, cash was hidden in walls, buried in fields, stuffed into barrels, or locked away in underground vaults. His brother, Roberto Escobar, who acted as the cartel's accountant, once admitted that nearly 10% of all stored cash, over $2 billion each year, was simply lost to rats, mold, or water damage. But these losses hardly made a difference when compared to the scale of Escobar's fortune. The logistics of managing so much cash became almost comical. The cartel spent around $2,500 each month just on rubber bands to bundle stacks of US dollars. On one occasion, while on the run with his family, Escobar burned $2 million in cash simply to keep his young daughter warm through a freezing night. Money had become so excessive that it was treated as firewood, waste, or simply left to rot in forgotten corners of warehouses. Across Colombia, cartel safehouses doubled as vaults. Behind thick walls and steel doors, fortunes were piled from floor to ceiling. Farms in Antioquia hid barrels of sealed cash beneath the soil, many of which remain undiscovered to this day. Some of these caches were buried alongside weapons, ledgers, and evidence of the cartel's global reach. For Escobar, money was more than wealth. It was both a weapon and a shield, one that bought loyalty, spread fear, and kept his empire alive. Rumors spread for years about Pablo Escobar's estates. People whispered about secret tunnels running beneath the properties, hidden escape passages behind doors that blended into the walls, and even torture chambers disguised as storage rooms. Whether all of these stories were true didn't really matter, because the legend of Escobar's hidden fortune became larger than Escobar himself. His paranoia only fueled these suspicions. He trusted no one, no bank, no accountant, and only a few close family members. His money wasn't managed in ledgers or accounts, it was buried in fields, locked in concrete vaults, or sealed inside walls. For him, each vault was not just a place to store riches but a symbol of survival, proof that even unimaginable wealth meant nothing unless it could be protected from rivals, authorities, or betrayal. But even with his vast fortune and power, Escobar could not stop the eventual collapse of his empire. When he was finally gunned down in Medellin, Colombia erupted in celebration and relief. Yet as people cheered his downfall, another mystery began to grow louder: what had happened to the billions of dollars he had hidden away? Hints of Escobar's secret fortune had surfaced long before his death. In the early 1980s, whispers spread about hidden cash stashes scattered not only across Colombia but also overseas. Escobar himself fed the mystery when he purchased a pastel-pink mansion on North Bay Road in Miami Beach. The 4-bedroom waterfront property, with direct access to Biscayne Bay, quickly gained a reputation among locals as a cartel-safe house and possible storage site for drug money. By the mid-1980s, U.S. authorities had seized the mansion, convinced it contained hidden vaults in its walls and foundations. As Escobar's power weakened in the early 1990s, the hunt for his wealth intensified. Police and soldiers raided his estates, warehouses, and farms, ripping apart walls and digging up courtyards in search of his hidden millions. At Hacienda Napoles, his famous 7,000-acre estate, investigators uncovered underground vaults, but most were empty. Despite the scale of these searches, only fragments of his fortune were ever recovered. After Escobar's death in 1993, his widow and children fled Colombia and eventually resettled in Argentina. They claimed they had been left with nothing and insisted that whatever money Escobar had buried, they never saw it. Years later, his son, now living under the name Sebastián Marroquín, wrote about his father's empire but also maintained that the family did not inherit any of the billions Escobar once controlled. The legend resurfaced in 2016, when Escobar's Miami mansion hit the news again. New owners, Christian de Berduer and Jennifer Valapi, demolished the property. During the demolition, workers discovered heavy concrete safes hidden in the foundation. One safe mysteriously disappeared before it could be examined, fueling speculation of theft, while another was taken under armed guard to a Florida bank. Later, during renovations, a sealed metal cylinder was uncovered beneath the kitchen stove. Hopes were high, but when it was opened, it turned out to be empty. The search for Escobar's hidden wealth reached international attention in 2017, when the Discovery Channel launched a series called Finding Escobar's Millions. Former CIA operatives Doug Locks and Ben Smith traveled across Colombia armed with drones, ground-penetrating radar, and metal detectors. They scoured cartel-owned properties, farmland, and even bunkers rumored to have been used as safe houses. At one site, they unearthed a safe that ultimately contained nothing. Still, the show shed light on how sophisticated Escobar's methods really were: safes lined with lead-to-full scanners, hidden chambers within walls, and vaults reinforced with concrete thick enough to survive explosions. The operatives also delved into the human side of Escobar's legacy. Disguised as filmmakers, they interviewed surviving cartel members and family. Escobar's sister, Luz Maria, spoke of her attempts to make amends by leaving letters at the graves of his victims. They also met John Jairo Velázquez, alias Popeye, Escobar's notorious hitman, who admitted to ordering more than 3,000 murders. Another former associate, Juan Esteban, nicknamed the Scorpion, claimed that massive amounts of Escobar's money were still hidden across Medellin. Yet even decades later, the search was dangerous. Doug Locks described it as kicking a hornet's nest, because violence still clung to Escobar's name long after his death. The legend grew again in 2020 when Escobar's nephew, Nicolas, made international headlines. He claimed that a vision led him to search one of his uncle's old Medellin houses. Following his instincts, he uncovered a stash of $18 million hidden behind a wall, wrapped in plastic. Alongside the cash were strange personal relics: a gold pen, a typewriter, and a satellite phone. Most of the money, however, was too damaged to use, ruined by moisture, mold, and decay after decades underground. These discoveries only deepen the mystery. While some stashes have been uncovered, experts believe billions remain buried, forgotten, or lost forever. Whether beneath the soil of Colombian farms, inside crumbling walls of old estates, or sealed in vaults waiting to be cracked open, Escobar's hidden fortune has become a ghost story, a legend that refuses to die. Nicholas admitted that he had come across other hidden stashes of money before, but he refused to share any details about them. Over the years, Colombian newspapers have reported several discoveries tied to Pablo Escobar's buried fortune. In 1989, barrels containing $4 million were unearthed. Just a year later, in 1990, $25 million in gold bars were found. In 2009, another $10 million was discovered at Hacienda Napoles, and countless smaller finds have been reported since. Officially, the government claims it has recovered around $75 million in total, but investigators believe that at least 10 times that amount may still be buried somewhere, decaying underground or waiting to be found. Some discoveries created heated debates over who the money truly belonged to. In some cases, the cash had rotted into worthless scraps, destroyed by moisture and time. In others, the bundles of bills were pulled from barrels in perfect condition, crisp and fresh as if they had just been buried. One farmer in Antioquia uncovered drums of dollars so well preserved they looked newly printed, sparking disputes about whether he should be rewarded for his discovery or stripped of it entirely. The world remembers Pablo Escobar as the drug lord who controlled billions, but the secrets hidden inside his vaults told a story that went far beyond money. During his reign, Escobar had already created an invisible empire beneath the ground. His secret vaults were not just hiding spots, they were carefully engineered to protect cash, weapons, sensitive records, and even himself if the situation demanded it. On the surface, Hacienda Napoles looked like a paradise of wealth and indulgence. Exotic animals roamed the property, there were massive swimming pools, and its courtyards and gardens stretched endlessly. Yet beneath this glamorous playground, investigators uncovered hidden chambers with steel doors and reinforced concrete walls. These underground rooms showed that the estate was not simply a symbol of luxury, it was a fortress built to withstand war. Raids on Escobar's estates in the early 1990s shocked Colombian authorities. Inside the secret vaults, they discovered crates filled with AK-47 rifles, grenades, and thousands of rounds of ammunition. Some vaults even stored rocket launchers and body armor right alongside piles of US dollars. Each chamber was essentially a war chest, ensuring Escobar's fortune was secure and that he was always prepared for a siege. But the vaults contained more than just money and weapons. Investigators also found waterproof containers holding ledgers and documents that were even more dangerous than guns. These papers included shipping schedules, coded financial records, and long lists of bribes paid to politicians, police officers, and judges. Every detail was written in precise handwriting, mapping out the reach of the Medellin cartel across Colombia, into Miami, and stretching further into Europe. For prosecutors, these ledgers became priceless evidence, offering a rare inside look into how Escobar's empire truly functioned. The darker discoveries did not end there. According to stories from former associates and locals, Escobar also designed soundproof, windowless rooms inside some of his properties. These rooms were described as having hooks on the walls and drainage systems in the floors, suggesting they may have been used as torture or interrogation chambers. While investigators never officially documented these sites, the accounts matched Escobar's reputation for brutality and the fear he spread among both enemies and allies. By 1991, Escobar was facing mounting pressure from both the Colombian government and the United States. To protect himself from extradition to the U.S., he struck a controversial deal with Colombian authorities. Under the agreement, he would serve up to 5 years in prison, but on his own terms. Instead of entering a government-run facility, Escobar built his own private prison, perched high on a mountain overlooking Medellin. This prison, called La Catedral, was nothing like an ordinary jail. Escobar handpicked his guards, ensuring that every man was loyal only to him, and he filled the compound with luxuries. Inside its walls, La Catedral had a football field, a fully stocked bar, a jacuzzi, a cascading waterfall, and even a massive dollhouse. From the balcony, Escobar set up a telescope that allowed him to watch over Medellin and even look toward his family home. He often spoke to his family by phone while enjoying this view, as if his prison sentence were nothing more than another chapter of his reign. It quickly became known by nicknames like Hotel Escobar and Club Medellin, a prison in name only. Behind its luxury and playful appearance, however, the facility served a far more serious purpose: survival. The building was designed with hidden escape routes, rumors of trapdoors, tunnels, and secret ventilated passageways that could allow Escobar to vanish if danger approached. Its location on a misty mountaintop, surrounded by steep cliffs, made it nearly impossible for the military to storm. Escobar even stocked the prison with an armory, ensuring he could defend himself if the government ever turned against him. For a while, the arrangement held. Escobar lived comfortably inside La Catedral while still controlling his cartel's empire beyond its walls. The Colombian government tolerated this situation, believing they had contained him. But in 1992, shocking reports emerged that Escobar had ordered the torture and execution of 4 of his own men inside the prison. The scandal forced the authorities to demand his transfer to a proper government-run facility. Escobar refused to go. In July of that year, troops surrounded La Catedral, but when they finally entered, Escobar was already gone. He had escaped through a wall purposely built with weak concrete, breaking it apart and slipping into the fog with his men. His foresight in building secret routes once again proved how much his survival depended on hidden passages and escape systems. After this infamous escape, La Catedral was abandoned, becoming part of Escobar's dark legend. Years later, in 2007, Benedictine monks took over the site and transformed it into a monastery. They built a chapel, a library, and a memorial to honor the victims of Escobar's reign of terror. Pilgrims and visitors still walk through the grounds today, reflecting on the strange reality that Escobar once lived here as both a prisoner and a king. Even after his death, stories about his underground tunnels continued to surface. An FBI informant claimed Escobar had built underground catacombs equipped with air circulation, allowing him to stay hidden for days at a time. Colombian raids on cartel safe houses uncovered partial tunnels and freshly dug shafts, further reinforcing the idea that Escobar's obsession with concealment went far beyond hiding money. His designs were meant to guarantee he would always be one step ahead of his enemies. But ironically, this same obsession would eventually play a role in his downfall. The beginning of the end came with America's increasing involvement in the hunt for Escobar. In 1989, President George H.W. Bush authorized a covert mission called Operation Heavy Shadow, created to help Colombia dismantle the Medellin cartel. That August, the United States deployed a specialized signals intelligence unit known as Centra Spike. These were elite operatives skilled at tracking fugitives through intercepted phone and radio transmissions. Their surveillance forced Escobar deeper into hiding and helped identify targets such as José Rodríguez Gacha, one of Escobar's most powerful allies, who was eventually killed. Yet even with years of monitoring, Escobar managed to escape capture time and again, shielded by a vast network of loyalists embedded within Colombia's police and military. By mid-1991, Escobar had managed to negotiate the controversial deal that allowed him to retreat to La Catedral. But when the arrangement collapsed in July 1992, everything changed. The Colombian government's failure to keep him in prison turned him into a fugitive once again. In the U.S. Embassy in Bogotá, Ambassador Morris D. Busby received 2 phone calls on the same night. The first brought good news. President Cesar Gaviria had finally ordered Escobar's transfer from La Catedral, something Busby had been urging for over a year. The second call, however, was devastating. Escobar had already slipped away, vanishing into Medellin with 9 of his men. The situation quickly turned into a disaster for the Colombian government. At the presidential palace in Bogotá, President Gaviria was furious when reports confirmed that no assault had been carried out as he ordered. Instead, the Vice Minister of Justice and the prison chief had entered La Catedral without authorization, only to be taken hostage. In a single night, Colombia's credibility collapsed. Years of U.S. pressure, countless lives lost, and millions in covert American funding now seemed wasted. Gaviria, who had long resisted giving the U.S. deeper involvement, was humiliated. He turned to Ambassador Busby and demanded full American support, declaring that Escobar would never again set foot inside a courtroom or prison cell. For Busby, a former Navy officer and counterterrorism veteran, this was the opening he had been waiting for. He knew that if Escobar was given time to regroup, he would rebuild his Medellin empire. The hunt had to intensify immediately, while Escobar was still vulnerable and exposed. Busby called upon Major Steve Jacoby, a man who had been quietly working in Bogotá since 1989 with Centra Spike. Jacoby and his team had listened to Escobar's phone calls for years, memorizing his calm and confident voice. Escobar's Spanish was refined, occasionally mixed with English, as he gave orders for kidnappings, reorganized drug shipments, or spoke tenderly to his wife, all in the same breath. Jacoby was confident he could locate Escobar within days. The real challenge, however, was not finding him. It was whether the Colombians could act quickly enough once they had the information. Their raids were often slow, riddled with corruption, and worse, plagued by leaks that almost always reached Escobar before an operation began. Busby realized that if Escobar was to be captured or killed, only one unit could be trusted to act with the speed and secrecy required. Delta Force, America's most secretive counterterrorism team. Inside the embassy's steel vault, Busby, Jacoby, DA Chief Joe Toa, and CIA station head Bill Wagner debated their options. Colombian law forbade foreign troops, but Busby argued Delta could operate undetected, disguised as trainers and advisors. All agreed Escobar would never be taken alive. Prisons and trials had already failed. This time, the hunt would end with death. Washington responded quickly. President Bush, heavily invested in the war on cocaine, personally backed the plan. After consulting General Powell, he instructed Defense Secretary Dick Cheney to give Busby whatever he needed. On July 26, a Delta Force team under Colonel Jerry Boyan arrived in Bogotá. Under civilian cover. 2 days after Escobar's escape, he re-emerged with a statement to Colombian media. Signed, Colombian Jungle Zone, Thursday, July 24, 1992. It portrayed him as a betrayed man forced to flee. He claimed government treachery had left him no choice but to escape, and even proposed a new deal, returning to prison if the United Nations guaranteed his safety. At the same time, his phone calls to lawyers were intercepted by Centra Spike. Escobar accused the United States of interfering in Colombia's affairs, instructing his attorneys to press President Gaviria on alleged American involvement. It was a calculated attempt to stir resentment against both the government and Washington. But Gaviria stood firm. Latadral was gone for good and Escobar was once again a fugitive. Centra Spike tracked his location to a wealthy Medellin suburb only miles from La Ciudad. For the first time, the Americans had both the tools and the political authority to act. By late July 1992, with Escobar already reorganizing, the man chosen to lead the hunt was Colonel Hugo Martinez. Hardened by years of failure and personal danger, Martinez had survived assassination attempts, bombs under his family's home, and even a $6 million bribe offered by a friend on Escobar's behalf. His refusal to bend defined him. Returning from Madrid, Martinez rebuilt the BL de Busa into a force of 600 men. Soldiers and police drilled into a disciplined strike unit. With one mission: destroy Escobar. Unlike his arrogant predecessor, Pinzoni, Martinez demanded results. His methods were harsh, even brutal, but they worked. The Americans supplied intelligence and technology. Martinez enforced discipline and fear. For the first time, Escobar faced an enemy who could not be bribed, intimidated, or bargained with. As predicted, Escobar's response soon turned violent, and he started attacking civilians. Despite billions spent and advanced tracking tools, Escobar remained elusive. Centra Spike pinpointed his calls with precision. Delta and Search Block raided hideouts with growing speed. Still, Escobar adapted, escaped, and struck back with bombs and executions. When the Search Block took out Prince Tyson Munoz, one of Escobar's most feared hitmen, Escobar retaliated immediately, and 3 police officers lost their lives that same day. Funerals became routine with widows fainting and officers buried weekly, victims of Escobar's informants and outside Medi. His support collapsed. The turning point was the bookstore massacre. Outrage forced the government to declare Escobar public enemy number 1, placing a bounty of 5 billion pesos, about $6.5 million, for his capture. It was the largest reward ever offered in Colombia. Soon a new force emerged. Los Pepes, short for people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. They bombed Escobar's estates, threatened his family, and left his associates lifeless with signs pinned to their bodies. Unlike the state, Los Peeps offered no trials, no deals, no mercy. Their campaign made clear anyone tied to Escobar would pay in blood. For Martinez, who had hunted Escobar for nearly 4 years, and for the Americans, who had pursued him for 6 months, Los Pepes became an unspoken ally. Their campaign of car bombs, assassinations, and threats devastated Escobar's network. Publicly, the Americans condemned the violence. Privately, they recognized its effectiveness. For years, Escobar had hidden behind lawyers, surrender deals, and political leverage. Now, his greatest weapon, terror, was being turned against him. The final irony. By early 1993, the manhunt for Pablo Escobar had taken a brutal turn. At the Search Block headquarters in Medellin, Colonel Hugo Martinez kept a drawer filled with photographs of the dead. Showing the stack to a Delta Force operator, he said coldly, "As long as I'm the commander here, they're not going to live." His unit claimed more than a dozen lives, officially recorded as casualties in gun battles, but the photographs told another story: bullet wounds to the head, signs of executions rather than combat. Even so, Escobar kept slipping away at the last moment. Delta operators bitterly referred to it as the last 100 yards, those final steps where Escobar always escaped. Still, Martinez gained respect. Prisoners who resisted interrogation rarely survived, but those who cooperated were jailed instead. His determination, backed by American technology, turned the Search Block into a relentless weapon. The Americans and Colombians knew time was running out. Their own government was considering negotiations. Attorney General Gustavo de Grafe pushed for a deal that U.S. officials feared would repeat the fiasco of La Catedral. A DEA memo in September 1993 warned that Escobar might cut a new agreement. Some of his men surrendered. On October 8, his brother Roberto Escobar and his feared hitman John Jairo Velázquez, known as Popeye, gave themselves up and were sent to Itagüí prison in Medellin. Pablo Escobar himself showed no sign of surrender. His lawyers kept negotiating, infuriating those risking their lives to hunt him. Frustration boiled over when Colonel Gustavo Bermudez told Colombian television he would rather see Escobar dead than captured. The comment caused outrage and earned him a death threat from Escobar's teenage son, forcing Bermudez to retract his words. But he had voiced what many secretly believed. By then, Escobar's list of enemies was growing. In 1992, he had executed longtime partners Fernando Galeano and William Moncada, sparking a deadly vendetta. Their widows, Maria Galeano and Dali Moncada, had both money and knowledge of Escobar's network. Together with Diego Murillo, better known as Don Berna, they formed the core of a vigilante group called Los Peeps. The group recruited sicarios with offers of 20 million pesos each. By October 1992, relatives of Galeano and Moncada were cooperating with investigators, passing on intelligence that guided raids and assassinations. Escobar recognized the danger, especially from Dali Moncada. After killing her husband, he ransacked her home and kidnapped anyone who might know her whereabouts. He even offered a $3 million reward for her capture. But by then, she was far beyond his reach. In August 1992, U.S. agents had flown her to Washington, D.C., where she became a DEA informant under the code name AE92053. Her anger against Escobar fueled her cooperation. She gave authorities detailed intelligence on his finances, properties, and inner circle. She even listed his lawyers, describing them as worse than Escobar himself, and urged officials to strip him of assets and target his family and associates, believing it would destabilize him. Her vendetta deepened after her younger brother, an MIT student with no cartel ties, was kidnapped and murdered. From that moment, Dali openly pushed for retaliation, helping to shape the increasingly ruthless campaign against Escobar. Other former allies also turned against him. Carlos Leder, once Escobar's flamboyant partner, sat in a U.S. prison seeking leniency. In a letter to the DEA, he described Escobar's movements between safe houses, his reliance on cell phones, his escape routes, and even his declining health. He revealed that Escobar was obese, out of shape, and unable to run for more than a few minutes. Fidel Castano, a paramilitary leader and former associate, also betrayed him after Escobar killed his friends. Castano began feeding information directly to U.S. and Colombian forces. In one raid, DEA agent Javier Pena recalled that Castano even helped search block operators in the field, once trying to save a drowning officer. These betrayals added yet another layer of pressure on Escobar. By late 1993, the walls were closing in. Sentra Spike, the U.S. Army's covert signals unit, had perfected the art of tracking Escobar's phone calls. Despite knowing the danger, Escobar could not resist calling his family, who were scattered and constantly harassed. On December 2, the day after his 44th birthday, he made the mistake that sealed his fate. He called his son Juan Pablo for an unusually long time. Sentra Spike traced the signal, and within hours Colonel Martinez's men were converging on Medellin's Los Olivos neighborhood. Inside a modest row house, Escobar and his loyal bodyguard, Alvaro de Jesus Agudelo, known as El Limón, waited in plain sight. They believed no one would suspect him of hiding so close to home. But a policeman spotted a bearded, long-haired man in an upstairs window. He looked older and heavier than Escobar's photographs, but the hunters knew it was him. The assault began. El Limón bolted first, crashing through a window onto a lower roof before sprinting across. A burst of gunfire cut him down. Escobar followed, carrying 2 pistols, including the Sig Sauer he had once handed over when he surrendered to La Catedral. He scrambled across the rooftops, firing back, but 3 bullets struck him, 1 in the leg, 1 in the back, and 1 through the ear. Minutes later, Pablo Escobar lay lifeless beside his bodyguard. Who fired the fatal shot became an instant controversy. Search block officer Hugo Aguilar claimed credit. Don Berna insisted it was his brother. Conspiracy theorists argued that U.S. agents delivered the kill. No conclusive witness emerged. Neighbors had hidden indoors, and the first photographs, taken by DEA agent Steve Murphy, only came after Escobar was already dead. The scene dissolved into chaos as police, journalists, and locals swarmed the house, destroying potential evidence. The official autopsy declared the cause of death as a gunshot to the head, but it also raised questions. When his body was exhumed in 2006 for a paternity test, no new answers surfaced. In 2020, forensic experts recreated the wounds using ballistic gel, supporting a theory long promoted by journalist Mark Bowden, that the headshot came from a 9mm handgun fired at close range, not a rifle. The wound showed no clear gunpowder marks, suggesting the gun may have been pressed directly to his head or that residue simply didn't register. Some investigators believe this proved Escobar had taken his own life, recalling his vow never to be captured alive. Others thought one of his hunters had delivered a final coup de grace. The official coroner's report went out of its way to deny suicide, but instead of settling the debate, it only fueled more suspicion. Despite the uncertainty, one fact remained undeniable: Escobar's reign ended that day. His body was lowered from the rooftop, photographed by the search block with grim satisfaction. For many Colombians, it marked freedom after years of fear. For others, it simply meant one brand of violence had been replaced by another, as Los Peeps continued their campaign with quiet approval from the state. To the world, the image of Escobar's corpse in Medellin showed the final chapter of a man who had once been untouchable, betrayed, and finally cornered in the same city that had once worshipped him.